everybody, and welcome to a new episode of What the Field. I'm Emmeline, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Professor Martinez, and our co-founder and farmer, Gonzalo Urcolo.
Thank you for inviting us, Emmeline.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation.
So today is actually a very special episode, and we're going to do something that we usually never ever do, which is talk about health and diet. And why are we doing this today? Why are we really getting out of our comfort zone and talking about such a sensible and very specific topic? Well, because our special guest, Professor Martinez, has kindly agreed to talk to us. And it's not just any guest. By conducting and being the principal investigator of the Predimed study, which is actually one of the largest studies conducted in Europe on health and nutrition, we thought, okay, this is actually the one and only opportunity we would have to talk a bit about the famous Mediterranean diet and olive oil. So thank you again, Professor, for joining us. We really appreciate the opportunity.
My pleasure.
Gonzalo, do you want to add anything? I know this is a topic you're very passionate about.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for coming, Dr. Martinez. And I think it's important to explain why we don't usually talk about health in crowd farming. We feel we are experts in farming and we feel we are experts in logistics. So we don't like to talk about topics that we are not expert. And healthy is a very important aspect that if you want to talk about this in your farmer pages, you should have like professionals auditing your text. And since we don't have that and we don't see the necessity, we always avoid to put things like this fruit is good for the health because of this. But having a product like extra virgin olive oil and having the opportunity of inviting Dr. Martinez, I think is a unique opportunity to break our rules and talk about health.
Yes, as we said, coordinator and lead investigator of the largest randomized trial in all of Europe on nutrition and health. We think that really warrants this episode to be about health exceptionally. So, Dr. Martinez, or Professor Martinez, how about we start about talking about the Mediterranean diet as such? What does the term Mediterranean diet even mean?
Well, the term Mediterranean diet does not belong to the current practices in Mediterranean countries such as Spain, Italy, or Greece nowadays regarding food habits. It refers mainly to the overall food pattern consumed in the 50s and 60s of the past century in southern Europe, especially in Crete, in Greece, also in Spain and Italy, and northern Africa. But it was lost during the last 3 decades because of the globalization, and we are importing lifestyles and diets from the United States mainly. There is the junk food, the sodas, all the burgers. I won't say any commercial brand, but there is like a pattern that especially younger sectors of the population in Spain are following, and this is unfortunate. So mainly it is a diet characterized by a large consumption of foods from vegetal origin, plant-based foods, but it is not a vegan or a vegetarian diet because meat is allowed and also fish and eggs, but the main sources of calories are fruits, vegetables, legumes, cereals, especially whole grain cereals, and the main source of fat and providing also a sizable amount of calories is olive oil, especially extra virgin olive oil. So extra virgin olive oil is like the flagship of the Mediterranean diet. You cannot speak of the Mediterranean diet without including extra virgin olive oil, and also tree nuts are really very important because they are present very often in the traditional Mediterranean diet. Fish is a good source of proteins and also of other interesting nutrients in the traditional Mediterranean diet. And also there is a good source of protein in legumes, legumes traditionally in Spain, but they are lost nowadays in the current Spanish practices, culinary practices. Our grandmothers used to prepare very good dishes of legumes, but now
lots of lentils, lots of
lentils,
right?
chickpeas, beans, and also you can allow for eggs. There is no problem with eggs. And also when you go for meat, prefer poultry instead of red and processed meats. These are the main elements. And also an important thing is a glass of wine with meals.
Red or white?
Red, preferentially red, because red wine has more phenolic compounds that are definitely healthy. I will never recommend somebody who is an abstainer to start drinking, or I will never recommend young people to drink alcohol. But for people older than 40, 45, they have more higher risk of cardiovascular disease or stroke, myocardial infarction. There are hundreds of epidemiological studies suggesting that moderate amounts of alcohol in the form of red wine, not as a psychoactive drug, but as part of the overall dietary pattern, they bring down the rates of ischemic heart disease and also ischemic stroke. They are the main causes of death in the world. So I will recommend to maintain the consumption of red wine for people older than 40, 45 years, only during meals and never as binge drinking. You know what binge
Of course,
drinking
binge
is.
anything is usually not good,
So
right?
we define binge drinking as drinking more than 4 drinks in a row during 2 hours, 3 hours. This is definitely very, very harmful. So it is a sensible topic, a sensitive topic, sorry.
May I ask, because you mentioned that meat, at least poultry and fish, are also part of the Mediterranean diet. Is it possible to have a healthy Mediterranean diet and not eat any products that come from animals?
Well, this is not a Mediterranean diet if you do that. So we need to be very careful in science when we use term. I don't believe in an Indo-Mediterranean diet, in a Japo-Mediterranean diet, or in a vegetarian Mediterranean diet, or a dairy Mediterranean diet. This is not. When we rank the foods according to adherence to the conformity to the Mediterranean diet, we usually give negative points to meats and to dairy products. So this is the score that is called the Mediterranean Dietary Score. Has 9 points, developed by my good friend Antonia Tricopoulou in the University of Athens. So it is very, very frequently used in nutritional epidemiology. So we give negative points to whole-fat dairy, so cheese, cream, butter, and also to all sorts of meat. So the issue here is not to eliminate, to completely avoid the consumption of meat, but to reduce the amount of meat. For example, we usually recommend people to have Sundays, at least 1 or 2 days in a week, not eating any meat. But meat, especially poultry or fish, they are very good sources of high quality protein. Also, eggs are very good sources of high quality protein, and you can definitely avoid any nutritional deficiency if you follow the Mediterranean diet. So it is healthy, it is palatable, and it meets the requirements of nutritional adequacy. This is very important.
Right. Does it consider the official definition of the Mediterranean diet? Does it consider that the consumption of these products should be organic or not organic? Because when you tell us that the definition of the Mediterranean diet, of the purest the Mediterranean diet, was the one that people were used to consume in Greece, Italy, and Spain during the 50s and in the 60s, maybe during this year, farmers were not using so much pesticides that they are using nowadays. So maybe, do you think is there a correlation between organic food or not?
Well, there little by little we are accruing evidence but about the harms of persisting organic pollutants and all these residues from the pesticides. But the evidence is not so strong nowadays regarding the way that we assess evidence in the era of evidence-based medicine.
Right.
So, of course, there are many clues, many hints that this is going to happen, but we need further research
Evidence.
on this topic.
It's probably hard to say
Yes, it is
long term, right? Because it's really hard to investigate
Yes.
because it's fairly recent phenomenon. I guess the same goes for, because you mentioned fish, for example. I've been reading articles saying that microplastics are being found in fish more and more, and then transmit or go to the human body as well because they consume the fish. But I think this is probably also something that it's hard to investigate as of yet, no? To do a long-term trial, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what we need nowadays in medicine, in the era of evidence-based medicine, is not just the mechanistic basis. So if you analyze the flesh of the fish, you can find some, for example, mercury or some persisting organic pollutants or so on. But it is also an issue of the amount, the absorption. So at the end of the day, what you need is to look at people who are very high consumers of fish, and what is going on with them after 10 years of follow-up of 10,000 of them. So this is very difficult to accomplish. So that is the sort of investigation that we are doing. And up to this moment, we can say that the usual consumption of fish, as it is today, farm fish also, everything, it is healthy, because we don't see any harm with a high consumption of fish. In fact, we see benefits with a high consumption of fish. Fish is always positively, beneficially scored in all the items of the Mediterranean diet that we used. I have been speaking about the definition proposed by Antonia Tecopoulou from 0 to 9. We have also a definition in Predimed that is very, very frequently used nowadays. There is 14 points. And one of these points is to consume at least 3 servings of fish a week.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives you 1 point out of 14 points.
Right.
So if you don't do that, if you don't consume 3 servings per week at least, you don't get that point. Right. And we see that the higher the points, the lower the risk of total mortality, cardiovascular disease, breast cancer, diabetes, arrhythmias. So we have seen a lot of benefits with this 0 to 14 score. And in fact, yesterday I published in the newspaper El País an article explaining that most of the Spanish population, the general Spanish population in a representative sample, they believe that they are very good followers of the Mediterranean diet. But when you objectively assess them, a representative sample with these 0 to 14 points, the average score is only 6.3. 6.3. It is less than half. So there is a lot of room for improvement regarding the Mediterranean diet. And the problem is that 81% of the Spanish population believe that they follow very closely the Mediterranean.
That's actually what you're saying. I can totally confirm this from my everyday life experience. When I moved to Spain, I always had these discussions because being from Austria, people are always telling you, oh, you guys eat so unhealthy because you use butter instead of olive oil, etc., and we're much healthier because we follow the Mediterranean diet. And then you would meet up with them, and as you said, where do you go? To some burger place or to eat some tapas, which are usually very fatty, cheap meat fried in something?
Don't touch the tapas, please, Emily. Don't touch the tapas.
I'm like, what Mediterranean diet? So it's actually, sorry, Gonzalo, for interrupting you, but you mentioned something that I thought was actually quite interesting, a very, very interesting notion that Gonzalo had the other day when we talked about the Mediterranean diet. You were wondering but whether or not ethnic origin plays a role. And basically, I think your thought was, does it have any impact at all? If I'm, for example, from Austria and my ancestors traditionally had a different type of diet, is my body maybe less responsive to it than
Is there
someone
any,
like Gonzalo?
is there
who's
any
from Spanish
evidence
origins?
that your ancestors come from a Mediterranean country, that the Mediterranean diet is better for you than someone that their ancestors are not coming from this region?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so from a purely biological point of view, because when there has been studies looking at the genetic background of people, and the importance of the genetic background regarding the effects of diet on health are tiny. They're very, very small. What really matters is the way of preparing foods. For example, we have done several studies in large American cohorts. The Nurses' Health Study that has more than 100,000 nurses follow
Wow.
up. They are volunteers. They provide every 2 years information since 1976 to nowadays about their diet and health every 2 years with updated information on diet. And we have studied there the effects of the Mediterranean diet, olive oil, and we have seen the same benefits that we observe in Spain, we have seen them in the United States. Together with our colleagues at Harvard School of Public Health, I have several people from my team working there, and we are continually collaborating. So we split the sample into different categories according to the ancestry, because we thought, not because of any genetic reason or biological reason, but we thought that people from Mediterranean ancestry may be more likely to prepare foods in the traditional Mediterranean way. So it is a cultural, sociological factor. And we see only small differences, in fact. Sometimes when they say they use olive oil for cooking, they use a lot of olive oil, because when you say sometimes I have said American people, please put olive oil in the salad. They just put
Just a
little
little bit,
drops.
no?
They're scared of the fat, probably.
So
no?
when Ansel Keys, that was the guy who coined the term Mediterranean diet, he was from Minnesota, and he came to the Mediterranean in the 50s and 60s of the past century. He wrote, they put a vegetable literally swimming in olive oil.
Like
So
a soup of olive.
for him, it
Extraordinary.
was amazing to see such a high amount of olive oil. So it depends on the culinary practices. So now in nutritional epidemiology, a very interesting field of research and also of health promotion is culinary medicine, to teach people how to cook, following the traditional Mediterranean practices of healthy cooking.
Let's talk a bit about olive oil
Yeah.
and the Predimed study. Something we were wondering whether you could explain from a medical point of view was whether there was an actual difference between extra virgin olive oil and regular olive oil.
We were a little bit crazy when we designed the Predimed, because you need to think, this was never done before. So we randomized volunteers for 5 years,
How many volunteers were there?
7,447,
Wow.
to eat not what they like, but what we told them to eat. And they were distributed at random. So at random, you receive 15 liters of extra virgin olive oil every 3 months. At random, you receive the advice not to consume any fat. So cutting a lot your fat intake. And the other group was receiving tree nuts. And the two groups with olive oil and tree nuts receive intensive education in the traditional Mediterranean diet. And the other group receive intensive education also on the low-fat diet. That was the standard diet recommended by the American Heart Association at those times for preventing cardiovascular disease. And you know what I mean. I say, you're not going what you like. You're not going to eat what you like. You're going to eat what I tell you. In breakfast, lunch, dinner, every day for 5 years.
I can imagine you did some exceptions during the birthdays or weddings, no?
So that was part of the education, how to switch to the consumption better in line with the intended diet. So we got a lot of compliance. And we observed a 30% relative reduction in the risk of a composite endpoint of myocardial infarction, stroke, and cardiovascular death in the two groups with the Mediterranean diet in comparison with the standard paradigm.
30%.
30%
Wow.
less risk of this combination of hard clinical endpoints. So we needed to stop the trial for ethical reasons, according to an external committee that were our advisors to ensure the safety of participants, because you cannot any longer go on.
Yeah, once you see that the evidence is so strong, you need to stop.
Then go on with the low-fat diet.
Yeah.
Because in the two Mediterranean groups, we were giving them a lot of fat in the form of olive oil and tree nuts and fatty fish.
A very naive question, maybe on my part, who has no idea about medical trials and studies. I'm assuming that the people who were selected to participate were screened beforehand to see if they had previous cardiovascular diseases or maybe hereditary issues or anything, no?
Yes.
Okay.
We need to pass a very stringent ethical committee and an institutional advisory board and all the requirements of informed consent, screening. None of them had previous cardiovascular disease. But they were at high risk because they have high levels of cholesterol or diabetes or hypertension.
All of them?
Well, either they needed to have either 3 major cardiovascular risk factors or type 2 diabetes.
Okay, so it's even more significant than the result. Okay.
What is happening? I mean, once you have this evidence and you have shown from a medical perspective this evidence to I don't know, to public governments, what are they doing with these numbers? I mean,
well, for me, sometimes the decisions of the politicians are surprising.
Yeah.
Because now they are going to put this front of pack labeling of the packaged foods, and they are putting you can have A, B, C, D, E. And this is a proposal. Fortunately, it is already stopped until they reach the decision, they make the decision. But the issue is that they wanted to put C to olive oil instead of putting A with the best evidence. This is nonsense. I have said this, I have written about this, many of my colleagues have written. And in addition, a very important issue in medicine, in medical research, is to have an independent replication of your findings. Unfortunately, last month of May, just 1 month ago, Lancet published a very similar trial to Predimed. Instead of 7,000, they had only 1,000, but all of them had a previous myocardial infarction. They did it in Cordoba. They have 2 arms instead of 3, instead of the 3 arms that we have, low-fat, nuts, and olive oil. They have only low-fat and Mediterranean diet plus olive oil. And they found a 27% relative reduction after 7 years of intervention with a very, very similar, almost identical protocol for the intervention than the Predimed. So we were very happy to see an independent group
results.
replicating our results. This is very important in science. You need to have independent replication of your findings. So what we were saying was found for another group, by another group. So this is important. And also, in addition to the reduction in cardiovascular disease, we found a 40% reduction in the risk of diabetes among those who were not diabetics at baseline. And also among women, we found more than 60% relative reduction in the risk of breast cancer in the group of olive oil.
So let's put the numbers in place again. 60% reduction in breast cancer for women. 60%.
60%.
Wow, this is
60.
amazing.
Yeah,
Not 16, 60.
60.
I mean, is wow. No?
Mm-hmm.
30% reductions in cardiovascular disease. And the other number is?
40% reduction in diabetes.
Type 2, right?
Type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm. So with the Mediterranean diet?
With the Mediterranean diet.
Compared with low-fat diet. What is the low-fat diet?
Well, the low-fat diet is to reduce all sources of fat in the diet. So
including extra virgin olive oil?
including extra virgin olive oil, tree nuts, fatty fish, and also, of course, fatty meats, and also whole fat dairy, butter, cream, margarine, avocados, for example, they are very fatty, all the sources of fat, because that was the usual advice that medical doctors were giving to their patients in the beginning of the 21st century. Mm-hmm. That was the recommendation, the official recommendation. It was called Step 1 diet. With you need to meet less than 30% of your calories coming from any source of fat, and that was included in all the dietary guidelines all over the world, and the ministries of health. Everybody was recommending less than 30% of calories coming from fat. That was step 1. And step 2 was less than 20% of calories coming from fat, all sources of fat together. Predimed has changed this. And not only Predimed, other studies. We have seen, for example, in the nurse health study, this large cohort and another similar cohort called the health professionals follow-up study in the United States, that olive oil reduces total mortality and also reduces cardiovascular disease very strongly. So this is very consistent because we used 2 independent cohorts and we found the same. This was the leader of this paper was Marta Wash-Ferré, who was working with Predimed, and she moved to Harvard. She has been there for 7 years now.
Harvard University in the States.
Harvard University in the States. And also we are seeing something similar here in Spain in a case control study conducted by Marina Poyan in the National Center for Epidemiology, with a case control studies, another design in epidemiology, especially for extra virgin olive oil, a reduction in breast cancer. And now we are conducting other trials. We have ongoing trials for preventing relapses of depression. It is called Predimed. One of my collaborators, Almudena Sanchez-Villegas, she's the leader. We are conducting another trial for prevention of relapses of breast cancer. Estefania Toledo, she is the leader. Very similar to Predimed, but for women who already had a previous breast cancer. And Predimar for prevention of arrhythmias, conducted by Miguel Ruiz Canela, who is another of my co-workers. So we are developing new trials to try to replicate the findings.
What is your motivation behind, what is your motivation of running these studies of Predimed? What is your main motivation?
Well,
after
I was skeptical, I was skeptical about all these issues. I thought it was just talking because, people in Spain were nostalgic of the diet of their grandparents.
They
on.
Still are.
Until I started to collect data. So the first study that I did in Pamplona was a comparison, what we call a case control study. We compare all the cases of myocardial infarction occurring during 3 years in Pamplona with controls, and I found a very strong reduction in the risk of myocardial infarction associated with the Mediterranean diet and with olive oil. So I thought, all these guidelines telling people to reduce the amount of fat, this is nonsense. With a lot of fat coming from natural sources of fat, vegetable sources of fat like nuts and olive oil and the traditional Mediterranean diet, you can do a lot. Formerly, I was working in cardiology. My first medical specialty after finishing, I was for some time a cardiologist. So I thought it is very important to prevent the main cause of death in the world. So if I am now a specialist in preventive medicine, what is the best thing that I can do? So to try to contribute to correct a misconception, because there was a misconception regarding what is the best diet. And, some things, for example, of course, cannabis does a lot of harm, definitely. Smoking does a lot of harm. But people are not every day consuming cannabis continually. So you need to eat every day several times. Mm-hmm. Yes or no, you are yes or yes. You, at the end of the day, you will have to eat something. So the selection of the foods is a key issue for your future health. So for me, this is a strong motivation. Well, the deepest motivation from somebody working in public health is social justice. You need to think, well, what can I do to help people? This is the reason why I'm working. I don't receive any money from the olive oil industry. I don't receive any money from any
It's going to be
producer.
the next question. Who financed the Predimed study?
We are working very hard in order to get public funding of all our studies. So the Predimed was funded by the National Institutes of Health in Spain, the Carlos III, the Instituto de Salud Carlos III. I was the coordinator from 2006 to 2013 of a network of investigators. Previously, Ramon Struck was the coordinator. We receive approximately €500,000 from the Spanish government every year to hire the dietitians and the nurses, and we ask it for free.
And to buy 50 liters of extra virgin olive oil.
That is what I'm going to. We were asking producers of olive oil,
right,
to give us the olive oil for free for our volunteers. Good. Without having any participation in the design or the results of the trial. We never informed them of any of the things ongoing. So, and we did the same with the producers of tree nuts.
Gonzalo, was your olive oil also donated? Or not yet? You're going to do it maybe for the next trial?
Not yet, but I am an olive grower. So
we received the olive oil from the Patrimonio Comunal Olivarero.
Okay.
Yeah, and we continue receiving it in another trial called Predimed Plus. We have almost 7,000 participants in this new trial. We add to the Mediterranean diet now physical activity, goals for weight loss and reduction in calories, right, as a way to fight against obesity and metabolic syndrome. And we don't have the results yet. Right. So I hope that in 2 years. I
encourage you to also to differentiate what you give is organic or not. So I can be the organic provider.
To do an extra trial, organic olive oil receivers and non-organic olive oil.
That would be a very interesting.
It would be interesting for us, especially.
And also varieties, and also even the time you harvest the olive.
Yes, this
because
is very important.
If you have early harvest, then you have the polyphenols. Because I can imagine that the polyphenols needs to do with all the found.
Yes. In Predimed, we have published more than 300 papers, scientific papers, peer-reviewed, and some of them are very mechanistic, looking specifically at the effects of the phenolic compounds. Usually, everybody says polyphenols. Okay. But for example, oleocanthal, that is very important, is not a polyphenol. It is just a phenolic compound because it has a single phenolic ring. So we have seen that the higher the amount of polyphenols or phenolic compounds in urine, the lower the levels of the inflammatory markers. So of course, the timing of harvest is very important. You have higher peaks of oleocanthal in olive oil if it is prematurely harvested.
Exactly. This is very important to explain to the people, is if you prematurely harvest, then you get better quality, but you have less quantity. Okay, yes. If you harvest later, you have more quantity of product, but the quality is not the same. And we talk technically about the quality. One of the main differentiators are the polyphenols and phenols that you were saying.
Yes, and also the shelf time of the olive oil, because once that you buy it, if you take a long time to consume it, they are decaying, they are going
the
down.
Life product.
Yes. Phenolic compounds they have a lot to do with the timing of the
even
bottle.
The bottle, because if the bottle is transparent and the sunlight goes inside, then they last for.
They are volatile compounds.
So we could say that the olive oil in a way degrades.
Yes, with time.
With time.
Yes.
So this is also the problem. I'm guessing if you buy it from, for example, the supermarket, you don't know the shelf life the product has had. It might have been there
you
for a while.
Usually find in the bottle or in the Tetra Brick.
So we need to check the date. Yeah.
Preferential consumption before that.
And
date.
if it was harvested early or not, usually it's also indicated.
They are not obliged to put when was it harvested.
But since the early harvest oil tends to be a little more expensive, a little bit more premium, I think They
yeah,
would
but you can put premium olive oil without harvesting.
explaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's important. I mean, it's sometimes the if you are not selling your extra virgin olive oil with your brand, you don't really pay attention to these details, no? I mean, okay, I'm going to sell to the cooperative, and then the cooperative is going to mix with other farmers, so they are going to mix the olive oil. So I think the motivation of harvesting your olives earlier in order to have a better quality of product is just if you are able to sell with your brand directly to end consumers.
What's an important point that's missing for me a little bit is the information of how much olive oil was consumed in your studies, because I'm assuming we talked earlier that the binge consumption of anything is not good. Is it an exception for the olive oil? Did you control the daily intake and maybe also the timing of the intake? Because
we recommended to use in the 14 points of the Mediterranean diet that we used in Predimed. We recommended the first point was to use olive oil for all culinary practices.
So for cooking.
For cooking, for salads, as a spread in the bread, for frying. For frying, this is important. The best oil for frying is extra virgin olive oil.
Why is when you go through the internet? I know, sorry for saying that, but doctor, going through the internet is not a good practice. But why there are in other cultures they are saying that olive oil is not good, or they are not used to cook with olive oil because they believe that for frying is not good.
Yeah, that it shouldn't be heated.
Because the smoke point.
Yes.
That
This is a myth.
even.
This is a mistake. So I don't know the origin of the mistake, but all the professionals, all the scientists working here, we all agree that extra virgin olive oil is the best oil for frying, because usually you don't get 180 degrees. It is also protected against oxidation because it contains a lot of antioxidants. And in fact, I was in the board of a doctoral thesis in the University of Córdoba, and this was a doctoral thesis of a food technologist, and they were reusing a lot of fats and oils for frying. And afterwards, they were looking at the inflammatory biomarkers in the blood of people who consume the foods, frying with reusing these oils. And the best one was extra virgin olive oil. So we have empirical evidence that this is a myth. Sometimes it can be caused, the myth, because of expensive prices for for frying, and you can find something cheaper, but this is not health, this is economy. In these 14 points, a score was to consume at least 4 tablespoons of olive oil. This amounts to about 45-50 grams per day. So very seldom.
Including what you use for cooking?
For everything.
Okay.
Summing up all the uses of olive oil, you will have about 45 to 50 grams per day. When we gave 1 liter per week, we were thinking in all the family, not only the volunteer in the Predimed. So I have published several books with the aim of reaching out all the general population about these 14 points. The first book was Predimed, date el gusto de comer sano. So enjoy healthy eating with Predimed. So in that book, together with the first dietitian, Ana Sánchez-Tainta, who was working in Predimed, and the first nurse, Beatriz and Julian, we wrote one by one a detailed explanation of what were the 14 points of the Mediterranean diet and how to comply with them, also including recipes for cooking. Is that the Mediterranean diet is highly sustainable by the population because they enjoy it a lot. So it is not a torture diet, and you are not torturing people. So this is the reason why we succeeded in Predimed, because otherwise, if you introduce a low-fat diet, it can have several interesting properties, but people do not keep it in the long term. and also for diets for losing weight. We are now in Predimed Plus using an energy-reduced Mediterranean diet, and we see that the weight loss is maintained 3-4 years without any regaining weight. This is unique because it is tasty. It is very tasty. So this is an advantage of the Mediterranean diet.
Amazing.
Okay. Just to quickly go back, one last question about the frying or using olive oil for cooking. So could you maybe tell us whether or not olive oil loses its properties? Is it better for you if you consume it raw, uncooked?
Yes. Well, I think that definitely it is better raw because some of the properties are lost with heating olive oil. So we recommended in one of these 14 points to consume 2 servings a day of vegetables and one of them as a salad, adequately dressed with a lot of extra virgin olive oil. So this is the way of consuming. And also for breakfast, our usual recommendation is dark bread, whole grain bread, a toast with extra virgin olive oil. This is the usual main course in the breakfast.
Gonzalo's favorite breakfast, no?
Yeah.
The bread with the olive oil and the tomato, very classical Spanish one.
Yeah, at my home we always have breakfast extra virgin olive oil, and now sometimes with avocado inside. And when I'm not with my wife, I put garlic. Because when I am with my wife, she doesn't like garlic too much, so I'm not allowed.
Do you have any favorite way of consuming your olive oil?
Well, I love salads, so I like to be very creative. So in designing salads, sometimes you can put oranges, grenades, you can put strawberries in salads. You can put a lot of things in salad. Blue cheese, a little bit of blue cheese, anchovies. For example, yesterday night was a splendid salad with a small feta cheese that is very typical from Greece, and also walnuts, and also anchovies, and of course the greens, and a lot of extra virgin olive oil. So I love this way of
incorporating the nuts and the fish, everything into one salad.
Everything in one salad. So you can try a lot of possibilities for salads, not only tomato, lettuce,
I even discovered that it works even for desserts, because I discovered in Spain through my suegra, as I call her, the mother of my partner, that you can actually make a cake. All my life, I thought butter was the only way of making cake, and I discovered here that with Gonzalo's oil, for example, it's very easy to make a very nice fluffy cake. So even for sweets, you can use it, and even orange slices with olive oil on top. It's a dessert here. I was very impressed by the healthier dessert options. Also, olive oil gives you, right?
Yes, of course.
Is sugar an element of any kind in the Mediterranean diet? Maybe, I don't know, substituted by honey or something?
No, I think that we have a severe problem with sugar. Humankind has tripled the consumption of sugar in the last 50 years, and this has gone in parallel with the epidemic of obesity.
It's also an American influence, no, the sugar?
This is an American influence, and it is especially dangerous for kids, for young people, because they develop a sweet tooth. So they don't like, at the end of the day, vegetables, fruits. They want something sweeter and sweeter. So I think that we need to be very careful with adding sugar. I am meaning the crystal sugar, not the natural sugars present in fruits or in dates or in raisins and so on. So you can perfectly consume raisins. They have a lot of sugar, but it is natural sugar in the matrix of the food.
And what about honey?
Well, honey has a lot of sugar, definitely. Okay. So you can use honey, but in small amounts.
Okay. Is honey one of the ingredients of the Mediterranean diet?
No, we have received a lot of pressure from external
introduce it.
sources to
From the
introduce
Beekeepers Association.
honey in our scores, and we have never introduced honey. It has a lot of sugar, definitely.
Right.
So, formerly in ancient times, in order to get honey, you need to combat to fight the bees. So it was not so easy to have such a huge amount of honey that is now available. So I think that it is a vehicle for consuming, again, a lot of sugar.
Being accustomed to eating too sweet. What would you say is the influence of nutrition overall in mortality or for mortality rates? Do you think it is a major reason?
It's impressive. It is impressive.
Higher
It is
mortality? Yes.
dramatic.
Dramatic, okay.
So you can predict. I love to do epidemiology studies. I spend a good time when I am analyzing data and preparing tables and report. I enjoy my work.
Like this podcast.
Yes. So but especially when I started in 1999. So it was 23 years ago. A cohort study called SUN, the SUN study. Sounds very well in English. The SUN study, Seguimiento Universidad de Navarra.
Right.
So I have 23,000 volunteers informing us every 2 years of their health and their food habits and all the medical procedures that they undergo. So we have full of information there. So you have in a database like 23,000 rows, and you have more than 5,000 columns. So you have more than 100 million data there. When you go deeper into this data, you discover what are the predictors of mortality, early mortality, what are the predictors of longevity. It is not very complicated. Smoking, the effect of smoking is overwhelming. When you see that, you see what a stupid thing we have done. Smoking in humanity. How were we so silly as to acquire this habit? Because it is overwhelming. Then sedentary lifestyle. Sedentary lifestyle has a lot of impact.
Pandemic hasn't helped.
Then
that
obesity. Obesity is a strong determinant of cancer, early mortality, and then the unhealthy diets.
That is correlated with at least with obesity and with the sedentary life, no?
But regardless of that,
right?
Even if you are lean, if you are slim, you will have higher mortality if you don't follow a high quality dietary pattern. So the importance regarding mortality, incidence of cancer, incidence of cardiovascular disease, incidence of diabetes, quality of life. So all these things are highly determined by these factors. A sedentary lifestyle, obesity, bad diet, and smoking. These are the most powerful predictors. The other predictor is age, of course, but you cannot modify age. But the other 4 predictors are easily modifiable.
Let me introduce one aspect that is probably not very medical point of view, but I think friendship, having a good friendships is good for your health. And if you follow Mediterranean diet, you will more likely have better friends.
That's
because
true. The social, I think the psychological, I mean, if you're...
The social
there's
aspect
a link,
behind,
right, between your mental and your physical
You
well-being.
cannot invite friends.
Yes,
you cannot
yes.
invite friends
I
for a
have
low
been-
dietary...
No.
I mean, please, don't
You are
invite
right.
people again to your
You are
house.
right,
It's true.
Gonzalo. You are very, very much right. Because I have mentioned the 4 main elements. But we have developed indexes not only of the Mediterranean diet, but also of the MedLife, the Mediterranean lifestyle. And we include to spend at least 1 hour a day with friends.
Yeah.
And sleeping a short siesta, less than half an hour.
The secret of Spanish health lifestyle.
Yes. So all these habits that are lifestyle habits also add a little bit to the healthy lifestyle.
It's interesting to see. It's not how much money you have in the bank. One of the reasons, no? So it's very interesting to see that.
Well, with the money that you have in the bank, differences are real when you are comparing very low wages. Very low wages. If you go from very, very low to low, you experience. But when you are in the middle, zone and you go up, you don't experience any advantage.
Yeah.
So it is not to become richer and richer. You become then more
Healthy.
healthy.
I mean, the
healthier
money
and
gives
with a
you
higher longevity.
accessibility also, because the problem is, I think, although they're working on this, at least in Europe, is that the cheap thing to buy in the supermarket is a bag of chips or sweets or whatever. And then if you go for organic vegetables, non-processed food, let's say, in some cases olive oil,
But it's
just
amazing
more expensive.
why processed fruit has the same tax than healthy
Yes,
food.
yes.
No, it's amazing. With
I
these numbers.
Another book that I recently wrote in 2020, I published it with Planeta in 2020, is called ¿Qué comes? What do you eat? Huh? And then and there I include a chapter on the ultra-processed foods. They are
Which
the
would
worst.
be what, for example? Could you give some example of ultra-processed food?
Ultra-processed foods are all those foods where you cannot distinguish the real food. You only distinguish a product, and you cannot know what is the food. For example, the nuggets,
Chicken nuggets, yes.
or the sausages, and so on. So they have a lot of additives, and they are filling the shelves of the supermarkets. So we include in ultra-processed foods the milkshakes with flavors and additives, the distilled liquors, because they are not just processed, they are ultra-processed.
So you
They
mean
add
like
additive-
whiskey and gin and these types
Whiskey,
of things?
gin, vodka, all these
Okay.
are ultra-processed. French fries are ultra-processed.
Obviously, all fast food, no?
And all these pseudo French fries, they say once you pop, you cannot stop. So you know what they
You are
what
very
they
elegant.
meaning.
by
So
saying this.
you don't know what they are using, because sometimes they use the worst prime matter to produce this. The things that they needed to get rid of, they recycle. Then they put additives. These fish sticks, for example. This is not fish. This is the things that you cannot sell in their true appearance. You need to transform them to make them palatable, to give them with additives and chemical and physical procedures a long shelf life. So they are all advantages for the food industry, because the prime matter is very cheap. They are highly palatable. You can sell them very cheap, so you have a margin despite selling.
They are not very perishable, so they last
So
for a long time
They
without
last
freeze.
a long time, so and they are very convenient because people can store them for a long time in their homes. So I have always defended that if you put taxes on sodas and junk food, the government need to use those taxes to reduce the prices of the foods that have been demonstrated according to evidence-based medicine to be very healthy. Because
Completely agree.
otherwise you will increase the gap in health between the richer and the poorer sectors of the population.
Right.
So this is unfair.
Very unfair.
But sometimes my suspicion, and I want to be very clear about that, my suspicion is that this is an excuse to put taxes to sodas and to junk food. It is a new excuse to put more taxes and to have further incomes for the government. With this excuse of health, they are not interested in health. They are interested in collecting more money and nothing else for the government, for the for their purpose.
Yeah, we need to make big changes now.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
we need politicians that are brave enough to make these big changes that in the short term they probably the image are going bad because they will have detractors, but we need that. But, okay.
In
So
the
we
whole
never
system.
talk about
Politics.
health, and now we never talk about politics, and now we are talking
And
about
about
things.
both in one part. So on that note, thank you again so much for coming.
It has been amazing.
Yes,
really
you're
amazing.
such a wealth of information. I think we both tremendously enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, Professor Martinez, I personally, I have to say thank you so much, not just for attending to this podcast and translating like very difficult knowledge that you have into a simple conversation. It has been amazing. We have understand everything very good. And thank you for what you are doing, for especially for the olive farmers too. But not olive farmers, but
And
for
the
the society
population as a
also.
whole, yes.
Let's make a promise here. Why don't we help Professor Martinez translate one of these books into German?
Sure.
Okay?
I'm here for you. I'm here for you.
Let's put
Professor.
hands here and let's do it. Okay?
So
So Professor Martinez, you can count on us.
thank you.
To get your information out into the world so that the Germans know it as well. So thank you also to our audience for being with us for another episode. We hope you enjoyed this little field trip into the world of the Mediterranean diet and olive oil. And until next time.